So before we get into any other slides or anything like this, I'll let you folks just play a little game. You're going to need to get into pairs for this. So maybe we can, Ellie, maybe we can have you join in a little bit as well. Yeah, so I'm just going to get into pairs, and in a moment, but not yet, I'm going to ask one of those people to put their hands together like this. I don't read the instructions, it's been a while since I did this. So part one, hold your hands out like you're going to give someone a hug. Cross your wrists in front of you. Turn your palms together, thumbs down. Lock your fingers and bring them out like this.
Oh, you're going to do this.
Yeah, right. So only one of you is going to do this at a time out of your pairs, but what the other person's going to do is they're going to point to one of those fingers, and you are going to try and move that finger.
Reach out, around, and then twist. Alright, that one. Oh, that's good. Oh my god.
So
I don't even think I'm going to do that anything.
This little activity is that when you practice inclusion, you're going to meet children who see things differently from the way that you see them. They're going to react differently to the way that you react. They're going to process things differently to the way that you process them. And to practice inclusion, successfully, a special touch is going to be needed from you. A little bit of extra care and attention for those. The objectives today, as I mentioned, is to give you the tools to help successfully, effectively include all kids into your program. And we start with really a couple of statements of belief. And the first one of those statements is that every child can make friends. If we cannot believe that, then we have to believe that some children are going to have sad, lonely existences throughout their entire life. And that's not an acceptable conclusion, I don't think. That's not, of course, to say that every child will make friends with everybody. That's obviously not very realistic at all.
And it's not always easy, but it's possible.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And that every child can participate. Not that every child will participate all the time. Or that not every child will want to participate. But that every child can participate. And finally, that every child can be successful. Again, not that they're going to be successful all the time. None of us are successful all the time. But every child has the opportunity, the potential within them to succeed. And the number one factor in ensuring successful inclusion is that you have a group of people who believe that and will work together to make it happen. That is singularly the most important thing right there in inclusion. So, well, you guys work with kids, right? So this next part will be no surprise to you at all. Hopefully this will talk to you. Because when it comes to leading kids, if you're on fire, they're hot. If you're hot, they're warm. If you're warm, they're cold. And probably if you're cold, you're probably fired. If you're in a recreational program for children, it's just not a good place to be. So, what is inclusion? What do you guys think inclusion is?
At least giving everyone the chance to be a part of whatever you're trying to accomplish or whatever your project you're doing.
Absolutely, it is about giving people that opportunity. Opportunity to participate, the opportunity to make friends, the opportunity to participate, and the opportunity to be successful. Specifically in terms of being inclusive for children with disabilities, that's where we're at. We've got a kind of tripod there. There's kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities. That should probably be the fourth leg of that chair, actually. We provide activities which are accessible for everybody, and we encourage positive relationships between those people. So, folks, take a moment. Again, if I have a room of 40 people, I'm going to give 10 minutes for people to brainstorm this a little bit, but have a little chat, or just throw it out, or however you'd like to do it. What makes you nervous about serving children with disabilities?
You're going to do it wrong.
That you're going to do it wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a reasonable fear, absolutely a reasonable fear.
Probably like that I would offend them or upset them in some way.
That's kind of what I was gonna go for.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
Well, we definitely got a lot in this presentation, which is going to cover all that kinds of thing. And you know, your point about being nervous about not doing it right, the fact is that you want to try. And the only people who don't make mistakes are the people who don't do anything at all. This is very much a new process, you know what I mean? 20 years ago, kids with disabilities were not being included in anything. 40 years ago, they were being hidden away in nursing homes so that people wouldn't have to see them. So this is new, and it's going to take just trying things out, and maybe we won't get it right first time. That's okay.
It literally is trial and error, so you will like think of things that aren't gonna work, and then you're like, oh, well, here's an idea. Like you're just constantly adapting. It's not like you're gonna get something right on, like the first time, you know, and then you have to adjust everything to put it together too, so, you know.
In 2002, we built the climbing wall here to go with our zip line. And we found ourselves at the beginning of a journey of creating an adaptive climbing program. There are no manuals out there for adaptive climbing. And those of us who were setting up that program had good experience of climbing instruction. We understood about like very much the safety side of things, but we didn't know how to make it accessible. And over the last 15 years, we've made lots of mistakes. But we have now got to a point where each summer we'll see around 40 people get out of their wheelchairs and climb up the climbing wall with the right supports in place. And that, it wasn't 40 of them 10 years ago. It's taken us that time, and we've learned by our mistakes, and we've learned with the help of our campers in a big way how to do that. Dan Ham, who's one of our campers who comes to camp, and he's been coming to camp here every year since it started in 1951. So he's seen a lot in this world over his years, particularly where it comes to the disability world. And he's been instrumental in helping us with that. You know, when we had a new idea, he was always the first to put his hand up and say, "I'll try that, no problem," and then give us really honest, legitimate feedback from it. So yeah, don't worry about making mistakes. Obviously, make things sure are safe, but making mistakes is okay. That's how we learn. We talk about failing forward in the experiential learning field. Okay, what excites you about serving kids with disabilities?
Giving them new experiences.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, when a kid tries something new, you're like, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Just like seeing the excitement on their face, like knowing that they can do something that they thought they never could, or they were told they never could before.
Yes, and that's the key. They get told they can't do it, and it so often isn't true. We'll have parents checking their children into camp here who have checked off on the activity consent form that their child cannot do the zip line, and when we ask them, you know, is there a medical reason why they can't do the zip line, and then their parents come in through check-in, and we're asking them. So just wanted to make sure that there's a medical reason that they can't do the zip line. Just clarify that, and the parent might respond with the line, well, of course he can't do the zip line, he has a disability. This is a camp for people with disabilities, and our zip line is for all our campers. So we have ways and means to help our campers do that. And that's something we have to explain to the parents, because they don't get it either, you know. And if your parents are the ones who tell you you can't do anything, you're going to believe them. You're absolutely going to believe them. This book is called Our Friend Michaela, and it's actually published through the National Inclusion Project. It's about a class of 6th graders. 6th graders? Third graders. Thank you, I started with grades. We got this crazy thing in the UK called years. And at one point, a young lady with a profound physical disability came to join their class. And it was difficult for them at first, but a couple of key things happened which allowed them to really embrace this young lady as one of their friends. I'm just going to read you the book, and then we'll have another talk about it afterwards. It's got some great illustrations, so I'll try and hold them up. There it is, 3rd grade. But they're from the Lower Nazareth Elementary School in Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
I've been there.
So, Michaela is a girl in our 3rd grade class. She is in a wheelchair and has lots of disabilities. But that does not mean we cannot be friends. Michaela needs a ramp to help her get in and out of her mum's minivan. When our class goes on a field trip, she uses a school bus with a special lift that works like an elevator. Michaela rides in her wheelchair up the ramp or lift to get into the minivan or bus. She stays in her wheelchair for the ride, but she still uses a seatbelt. Michaela can't eat with her mouth, so she has a tube that goes right into her belly. Her mum feeds her special milk through the tube. She can still taste things like lollipops, and her favourite treat is cotton candy. Michaela can't hear very well, but she can hear us. We love talking to her. She can't see very well, but she can see bright colours. She can see red and yellow the best. We use bright coloured markers and crayons to colour pictures for her. Michaela has brain damage. Before she was born, when Michaela was still in her mum's belly, she didn't get enough air. Because she didn't get enough oxygen to her brain was injured. Her brain doesn't send the right messages to her legs, her arms, and other parts of her body she can't use. That is why she can't walk or talk and has trouble seeing and hearing. When we first saw Michaela, we were surprised because we had never had a kid in our school in a wheelchair. Most of us stared at her because we didn't know what had happened. We wanted to know what was wrong with Michaela. We had never met a kid with a disability. We felt shy. Most of us were also a little afraid when we first met her. We felt scared because we thought Michaela was different and not like a normal kid. We were afraid of what she had. One of us even thought it was contagious, but we learned that it's not. There's nothing to be scared of. We felt bad for Michaela because she has brain damage and is in a wheelchair. We didn't know how to talk to her. We thought she would not be able to play games or sports with us. We had no clue how to be Michaela's friend. But now we know. It's much easier than we thought. On Michaela's first day of 3rd grade, her mum came in and told us about her. She answered all our questions. When we thought of new questions, we asked our teachers. We also asked other kids who had known Michaela before. After a few weeks, we got used to Michaela. We weren't scared of her anymore because we'd learned there was nothing to be afraid of. We felt happy because we had never had a friend with disabilities. Now we do. Michaela is our friend. We help push her to class. We sit with Michaela at lunch and talk to her. At recess, we push her in her special swing. Kids with disabilities like to do the same thing we do. Michaela likes to listen to music. She watches American Idol with her family. She's a Clay Aiken fan. Last summer, she even saw Clay in concert. Michaela goes to the mall and shops at the same stores we do. She wears the same kind of clothes, and she might even get her ears pierced. We think she should. Michaela can even do some sports. She roller skates at the skateaway. She uses her wheelchair to skate because she has wheels on the bottom of it. Someone just has to push her around. Michaela is a cheerleader. She likes to cheer. Every game she wears her uniform and brings her pom-poms. The other girls hold her hands and help her shake them. She has signs on her wheelchair that say, "Go Wildcats," and stuff like that. Michaela goes bowling. Instead of throwing the ball, she drops the ball down on a special ramp and someone helps her push the ball off. The ball will roll all the way down to hit the bowling pins. In gym class, she can use the bowling ramp to pitch when we play kickball. It was our idea to have Michaela be the pitcher. Michaela talks to us by hitting her switch. Her switch is a button you put on her wheelchair. Whenever she turns her head to hit it, the switch controls whatever it is hooked up to. She uses her switch to talk by playing a recorded message. Michaela has to practice hitting her switch so it gets easier for her. Michaela can work almost anything with her switch. She has a special spinner with all our names on it. By using her switch, Michaela spins the spinner to pick which of us will be her helper for the day. She uses her switch to play games like the math bingo game. By hitting her switch to make the fan work, Michaela can blow out the candles on her birthday cake. She also uses her switch to cook. Her sister holds the mixer while Michaela powers it with the switch. From Michaela, we've learned that people with disabilities aren't really different. Michaela is no different from anyone else. She does things in a special way, but she can do just about everything we can. Now that we know more about Michaela, we feel silly that we were afraid of her. She is just like us. We are glad Michaela can do things we can and are happy we made a new friend. We hope Michaela is in our class again. If we meet someone who doesn't know Michaela, we will introduce her. We will tell them what happened to Michaela and explain about her disabilities. Even if we have to explain over and over again, we will, because they might be afraid, just like we were when we met her. We will tell other kids not to be scared. That Michaela is nice and it's fun to have her as a friend. It doesn't matter if your friend is in a wheelchair. The disabilities don't mean that you cannot be friends. Having a friend with a disability is cool. That's the end of that book. Did you want to follow up on it before I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, so I work at an elementary school, and I wanted to work with elementary school students because, well, so many reasons, but mostly because they're younger, they're more open-minded to new things, and they are more apt to just ask the questions and then get on with it, you know what I mean? They don't dwell on things. So for example, when I first got to my school, the biggest thing is they're all like, oh, you broke your leg, and I have to explain, no, my legs aren't broken, you know, and I relate it to things they know, like talking about my balance, and if you walk on a balance beam, you know, you have balance, but it can be hard. I'll say it's just hard for me to stand, and if I need to stand, I have to hold on to stuff, and I have to hold on to stuff to walk. Oh, you know, and then next day they'll come back with a different question, like, so do you sleep in your chair? Like, that's like the number 2 question. And I'm like, where did I get that? Like, what? No, I sleep in the bed just like you do. I get out of the chair. Oh, so does your mom live with you? No, my mom doesn't live with me. You know, like, so we just go through these questions, but once they're finished asking it, they treat you just like anybody else. They're like, cool, all right, you know. So the other reason why I did it is because a lot of times those are the years where you're like molding how open they are to things, and a lot of times if they're exposed to things at a younger age, they'll accept them more when they're older. Another example is like when I go to a grocery store or something, and a little kid comes up to me and they're like, "Whoa, that's so cool," you know, and their mom is like melting of like embarrassment and like turning red and is like, "Oh my gosh," you know, and I'm sitting here trying to like calm the mom down and like explain to the kid like what everything means. But sometimes the parents start pulling the kid away and they're like, no, don't, you know, and it makes me so mad because you don't even know that you're putting it in their head that they're not allowed to talk to me. Like, you're telling them not to interact with me, that it's wrong, that it's uncomfortable. Like, you're putting that onto them and they don't even feel that, you know? So then those kids grow up to be people who don't know how to interact and feel uncomfortable and feel like you're not supposed to talk to those people, you know, that look different and you're not supposed to ask the questions. So then they turn into the people who totally avoid me in the grocery store, which I know who those people are because they avoid eye contact and like act like I'm not even in the aisle, and I'm like, hello, like I kind of want to do a dance, and see yourself finally look over, you know, and they're like, no, not at all. So in those instances, I usually like chase the kid around and I'm like trying to answer the question, because I'm like, I don't want them to be scared of me, like, and you're putting that fear into them. So I figured if I teach in a younger like grade and that sort of thing, I can expose more kids to people with disabilities and show them that they're just like everybody else. Just might do some things a little different, but we all do things differently, so really we're all the same. And it's just a whole process to learn that. And at times I wish that adults were more straightforward and just ask the questions so we can just like get over all the awkwardness and like the but it's part of life. And we all learn in different ways. there we go.
So, looking back to the book about Michaela, there's a few things that struck me as I read this, and I've read it a few times now. But I'd like to invite you guys to share anything that struck you about this book.
I love that the kids came up with their own ideas.
Yeah, that's really cool. The bit about the pitch.
The pitching, yeah, for kickball.
You know,
Yeah,
and that
I
was,
never thought of that.
and it was the,
So cool.
if you go behind the scene on this a little bit, the coach didn't know how to adapt it. They were scared to do it. And their idea was just have Michaela on the side, you know, cheerleading or whatever. And it was the kids who came up with this idea about how Michaela could be included in this activity and be an integral part of the activity. Because pitch is important in baseball, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay, just checking.
Yes, it is. Just like the bowler and cricket.
Bowler and cricket. There you go. So, anything else?
I could really relate to the kids saying how afraid they were.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was in school and nobody really told us. You know, they would sit there with their aide and that was it. And I didn't know what autism was or Down syndrome and why they would act up and everybody would stare. You know, like there was never that clarification, and I wish.
Absolutely. So a key part in this book, and if you look at the language in the first part of the book, it's all about what Michaela can't do. She can't do this, she can't do that, she can't do this, she can't do this. By the end of the book, it's all about what she is doing and how she is participating with the rest of the children, the rest of her peers. The crucial page is when Mum came in to just answer the questions. And the other crucial part of it, as well as Teri was saying, is that kids ask the questions. They don't think it and then censor it in their mind and think, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that. Someone might be offended. They ask the questions. If we had thought, if I had met Teri and thought that your condition was contagious, which obviously I don't, would I have asked the question? But the child will ask the question if you give them the opportunity to do so. And obviously moving on from that, that question, if the contagious question had never been answered, how would the relationship then ensue between those children? Yeah, they would have just been standoffish the entire time.
It's a totally valid question.
It really is.
Like, if you don't know, you're like, well, I don't want, you know, to get sick or anything like that. Like, I want to know how it's going to affect me, you know? So, like, I feel like it's so valid. And the funny thing is, adults have those same exact thoughts. They just don't ask it, so they let it affect the interactions, and we want to create environments where kids don't have that, so they grow up to be those adults that just ask the questions, you know.
So, but once those questions were answered, that removed all those barriers, and as we can see from this story and the picture on the back of them all together, that they became really great friends. Again, if you go behind the scenes again with this, Mum found herself surprised that children from Michaela's class were turning up on her doorstep at night to come and hang out with Michaela, because that had never happened before. And it really did happen. And the kids would come around and they'd read stories from Michaela at night. And yeah, they really embraced that friendship because they were given permission to, and they were explained how to. I'll show you a scene from a movie called Darius Goes West. I'd strongly recommend you watch this movie if you haven't seen it before. It is a really, really amazing movie.
Cried.
And laugh.
And laugh and cry a little bit.
Darius Goes West. Darius is a young man with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a very difficult disease to kind of cope with, really. Not only for the person who has that diagnosis, but for everybody else around them in their lives. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is the #1 killer of children in America. And it is a muscle wasting disease. It's the most common form of muscular dystrophy. And certainly when I started working with youngsters with Duchenne muscular dystrophy back in the early 2000s, their life expectancy was around 21. Now it's getting closer to 25. That's still way, way, way too young.
Darius is actually 26 right now.
Yeah, and Nick, who used to come to camp a little while ago, he passed and he made it to 30, which is unbelievable.
Was he 30?
Yeah, he was 30 years old, which is unbelievable. But still, you know, if you told anybody else they were going to 30, that wouldn't be, you know, something which they would be happy about. So these youngsters, they process all kinds of things as they're teenagers that most of us should never even have to think about when they're that age. Darius' older brother, Angelo, he also had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he passed when he was 19 years old. he went to a camp, a kind of day camp, a little bit similar to this, but it was a day camp, and he had some friends who were counsellors there, and before he passed, he asked them to keep an eye on his little brother, Darius. And they did more than that, they became really great friends, and in fact they decided that they should go on a road trip. They're all from Georgia. Darius is not from a wealthy family, so he hadn't travelled really anywhere out of Georgia. And they did the fundraisers, they put it together, and they did this trip to Los Angeles, California, where their plan was to then bang on MTV's door and demand that they pimp Darius's road. This is the documentary of that journey, and it's a really, really, really moving story. I just want to show you one scene from that movie.
We had some sushi and some wasabi with it. Come on, just give me the sushi. You know what it is?
We decided to make a bet.
So we made this bet
On whether Darius will eat a spoonful of wasabi or not.
Are we getting odds on how long it's
Dude.
They bet me like $10 each week of wasabi sauce to eat up the sushi.
Somehow, Darius thought that he could handle it.
You should go slide.
What's up?
Go slide.
A whole bunch of wasabi. And I don't know if he's never had it before or what, but
I can't say it. Go slide.
$200 to eat a plate of wasabi.
I would do that with wasabi for $100. I don't know how much he got. He probably got 20.
So he was like, dude, I'll eat this for free.
10. You got $10, you know.
I'll eat this because I like it.
Wasabi.
Yeah, the W.
Okay.
It's hot, right? It's hot.
Johnny, you sit down. Yeah.
Somebody will.
No water. You can drink water. I can. Yeah. Drink water.
He did that. I don't remember if he threw up, but he was about to throw up.
Spitting this wasabi out.
It's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Eyes all teared up, you know, and snot coming out of his nose.
Just eyes watering up.
Oh, he looked like he was a crying little baby.
It was pretty disgusting.
But he was laughing the whole time. Everybody in this cafeteria is just looking over at these crazy kids.
Someone that was around us felt sorry for him. I was like, we're just treating him like one of the boys. It's the same stuff we do to each other.
That's not what
If anybody in the crew would have pitied Darius, then we wouldn't have reached the level of friendship that we did. So
For anybody that looks at that and says, oh, they're picking on him, they can just, buzz off. I'm trying to think of a polite way to tell someone.
to me, this happiness is proof that pitying someone just because they're in a wheelchair is irrational.
I don't like people feeling sorry for me. I like them to accept me, and for me, the last thing in the world is that we need somebody to feel better for.
I did. Some other crew members did. I didn't have any money.
That night, it gave me payback. People in a wheelchair don't try to put salami. It's really hard.
We guys get together, we do stupid things, that's just who we are. There was that thing brought up that some people thought they were bullying him. No, that is exactly what we do. We just do stupid things together. Yes, teaspoon. And the question comes up about pity as well. And as Darius says, he doesn't want him to pity. Who wants somebody to pity you? Anybody want to have someone else's pity? No, what we say if we're pitying someone is we're saying that we are somehow in an elevated position in which we can look down upon you and gift you our pity. That's just not an inclusive idea. It's just not an equal peer-based idea at all.
With that, I feel like it's that when people do pity you, I don't think that it's in a way of like, I don't think they mean it in like a negative way, you know, they just feel bad about the situation. I even had one of my students at the beginning of the year, like every day, he would just I still do all these really cool things. My life is great. Like, there's nothing to feel sad about. Like, don't worry about me, you know, just like live your life. My life is happy, you know. Like, and trying to get the concept like in his head that it's like I get what he's saying, but you don't need to feel sad because I still can do A, B, C, and D, you know. But like now, he never talks about that or anything. Like it's like he doesn't even think about it. Half of my kids don't even like mention it or anything like that. And if somebody else comes up to me and like asks why I'm in a wheelchair, they're able to explain it to them. I don't even have to say anything, and I'm like, well, good, because I'm tired of repeating myself. But like, so I think initially they don't mean it in a negative way, but if you stay there, if you stay in that place, you're not getting to know that person for who they are. You're just determining what their situation is based on what you know, which you don't know them. So it's not a rational concept to have for a long period of time. Does that make sense?
Definitely echo that. Pity very rarely comes from a bad place. It usually comes from a good place. It's just something we need to move past if we're going to actually build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're here, or if you feel that you're here and you feel that person's here, that there's just no common ground here.
Yeah.
Both got to be right. Okay, so first steps to creating an inclusive environment, and that is first of all set the atmosphere. And what's really important is establishing an atmosphere where mistakes are okay. It's okay to make a mistake. It's not a problem. People make mistakes all the time, and as we talked about earlier, if we don't make mistakes, people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything, ever. So set a scene where it's okay to make mistakes and not get it right every time, but to create this environment where we can learn from the mistakes that we make and we can fail forward.
And with that one, even with teaching, I have a lot of kids who get like really upset if they get something wrong, like over and over again. So I'll actually, on purpose, do things wrong and be like, oh look, I'll just go back and fix it, you know, and show them that it's no big deal. Everybody makes mistakes. Plus, I'm like the clumsiest teacher ever, so they see that as well, and I'm like, hey, can you pick that up? So like nobody's perfect. We all have our things, and I constantly say that in the class. Like we're all learning. There's not one person in here that knows everything, including me. So we're all learning together. So.
Yeah. And if you start that off at the top of your program, creating an environment where mistakes are okay and forgiveness is normal, this is the real trickle-down theory. This is where trickle-down will happen within your program, through all of your young leaders and then through your children on your program as well. Oops. Words are powerful. For you as leaders in programs, words are especially powerful. You can build up a child in the moment, you can knock them down just like that, just by the careless use of the word. And for folks with disabilities, and for the folks who are involved with the disability rights movement, just like the people who were involved with the women's rights movements and the civil rights movements before them, language was an important area of discussion, and that is no different right here. I want to just start with a really obvious one which we hear all the time, and one which people don't really know why maybe necessarily that word is used. It's just kind of fallen into the language and people use it, and that's the R word, the word retard. People use that word all the time. When people use the word retard or retarded, what are they saying?
Dumb.
Yeah, stupid, right? They're saying that something's stupid. They're saying that somebody is stupid, or they're saying that something they have done is stupid. They're equating that word retard or retarded with stupid. And that is a huge problem for a lot of people for very legitimate reasons. The word retard has been used in diagnosis for many years. It isn't anymore since 2010. But the diagnosis meant that word was associated with a group of people, and then we start using it as an insult by comparing that group of people with somebody else who's done something that we think is stupid. Somebody who had, or back in the day when they used this term, we use intellectual disability now instead, but mental retardation was the term that was used. Folks who have a diagnosis of an intellectual disability may very well be incredibly intelligent, but they may also take a little bit more time to process things. I am going to read you a letter in a moment which says it much better than I can possibly do it. And it was in response to a lady by the name of Ann Coulter. I don't know if you know who she is. Yeah, she's a particularly odious political talking head who appears on Fox News all the time. And in the 2012 presidential election, she had tweeted that she supported Mitt Romney's treatment of the retard in reference to President Obama. That caused a lot of problems on the press. You know, people were criticizing her, and she took that opportunity to raise her own profile, get on TV, and say that she'll say whatever she likes. It's a free country. The word police can go away, and all that kind of stuff. In response to that, a really excellent young man by the name of John Franklin Stevens wrote an open letter, and I'd just like to read it to you, because it says it much better than I can, and I have copies for you too. Dear Ann Coulter, come on Miss Coulter, you aren't dumb and you aren't shallow, so why are you continually using a word like the R word as an insult? I am a 30-year-old man with Down syndrome who has struggled with the public's perception that an intellectual disability means that I am dumb and shallow. I am not either of those things, but I do process information more slowly than the rest of you. In fact, it has taken me all day to figure out how to respond to your use of the R word last night. I thought first of asking whether you might meant to describe the president as someone who was bullied as a child by people like you, but rose above it to find a way to succeed in life, as many of our fellow Special Olympians have. Then I wondered if you meant to describe him as someone who has to struggle to be thoughtful about everything he says as everyone else races from one snarky soundbite to the next. Finally, I wondered if you meant to degrade him as someone who is likely to receive bad healthcare, live in low-grade housing with very little income, and still manages to see life as a wonderful gift. Because Miss Coulter, that is who we are, and much, much more. After I saw your tweet, I realized you just wanted to belittle the president by linking him to people like me. You assumed that people would understand and accept that being linked to someone like me is an insult, and you assumed you could get away with it and still appear on TV. I have to wonder if you considered other hateful words but recoiled from the backlash. Well, Miss Coulter, you and society need to learn that being compared to people like me should be considered a badge of honor. No one overcomes more than we do, and still loves life so much. Come join us someday at the Special Olympics. See if you can walk away with your heart unchanged. A friend you haven't made yet, John Franklin Stevens, Global Messenger, Special Olympics. It's pretty powerful. It's a prose, yes. And you know, one of the things which Miss Coulter would say is that this is just political correctness. This is one group of people standing up and making a decision about what somebody else wants without conferring with them. And she makes that assumption as well because she assumes that people with intellectual disabilities don't have these thoughts. And that is absolutely 100% untrue. This is coming from the people themselves, as this letter clearly demonstrates. It's not me telling you not to use that word, it's the people who are affected by it. And they should have the right to choose how a word affects them, just as we have seen in all of our other rights movements over the years. As we look through that though, I think we could probably give John Franklin a few pointers too. I think dumb is a word which we probably shouldn't be throwing about there as stupid either, as that is specifically relating to our deaf community. And I'm sure if that was explained to John Franklin, he wouldn't have a problem with it. It just probably hadn't been explained to him at that moment in time. There are some other words as well which we see thrown about there all the time, which are fairly inappropriate and very old-fashioned. One of them is the word handicap that gets thrown about all the time. Where do you see the word handicap in everyday life all over the place?
Parking lots.
Parking lots, yeah.
Bathrooms, yeah.
Bathrooms, yeah. The bathrooms and the parking lots, they're not handicapped. They are accessible parking, they're accessible bathrooms, they're accessible hotel rooms. And this is also a really great example of where a word, a generic descriptor, can be used inappropriately for the handicapped parking. That may be of no benefit to many people with a disability. People with a disability are not a homogeneous subgroup of individuals. They all have different needs. For some people, having a parking spot close to a shop, well, they can walk just as far as anybody else, you know, and exercise is good for us, so actually having them park there might be detrimental to them in the long run. But those accessible parking spots are really valuable to some people. Some people who have those profound physical disabilities who have a lift in their van and they need the space to help people get out of the van. So many times I see the big spaces with the area to the right or the left where the lift would work is taken by somebody who has the thing, and you see them, they get out of the car, they just walk on in. And that has prevented somebody else from using that accessible parking space who really, really needs it. Does anybody know where the word handicap comes from?
Holding a cap in your hand or something.
Yeah, well that is, that's actually a mythical origin, but it's such a commonly believed story that it is absolutely as relevant, even more relevant than the original, the actual story. And the actual story is that the word handicap comes from an old English bartering game in which the loser was said to be left with their hand in their cap and was said to be at a disadvantage. They started spreading that use of word to other sports like horse racing. Horses are handicapped in races. That means if a horse has been successful in a few races, they start adding weights onto it, so it's slower. And that's what handicapping in horse racing is. Then that term started being used for people who were seen to be at a disadvantage. So it's a really negative term. If we look back to that mythical origin, that's a negative term. Why should any group of people have to resort to sitting on the side of a road holding their cap out to make a living? It's just, you know, it has these negative connotations. Even special education is coming under scrutiny. Special needs. People's needs aren't special to them. They're just their needs. We all have our own needs. They're all individual. We all know what our needs are. They're not special to us. They're normal. And the same for our folks with disabilities.
A lot of times for special education now, the term they want to use is exceptional children. So it's the kids who are the exception. Not somebody like, it's not like a special thing and that sort of, but you have like how you teach and then the exception to teaching it that way so that you're adapting to the students who need it another way. So for example, in Nashville, they say exceptional children. Here in Denver, they still say special education. It's not going, like it's spreading, but it's not here yet. So I don't know when they're going to make the change and who decides it, but that's kind of where they're going at with that. And a lot of special education textbooks and stuff now are called exceptional children.
The really cool thing is the disability rights movement itself came up with a far better idea than any of these things. And it's an idea that just not only pertains to people with disabilities, but it pertains to society at large. And that is the concept of people first language. Has anyone heard that phrase before? Yeah, right. It's simple. It takes a little bit of work when you're actually practicing it, but it really makes a difference. And this is really important because if you put describers in front of the person, you're making that describer more important than the person. If you get described enough, you will start to be defined that way, even by yourself. And we see this at schools everywhere. There are children who unfortunately get bullied at school, usually for very superficial reasons. Maybe because somebody decides that they're ugly, or fat, or spotty, or stupid, or whatever it might be. And then for years at school, that's how they get described. Oh, the stupid kid, the fat kid, the ugly kid. And then after 7 years of school, guess what? They believe it. They believe it, and they're going out into the world believing that. And that's because they have been described by other people, and that description has turned into a definer. So, we want to change that paradigm. Use people first language. Yeah, for years this child at the top would have been described as the autistic kid, and the one at the bottom would have been described as the wheelchair-bound kid. We can change that. This is a child with autism. This is a child who uses a wheelchair. We're not going to deny that this child has autism. That's part of who they are, but it's hardly the only thing that they are. They are much more than just one part of their personality. If we even just look at these pictures, we could probably find 3 or 4 different ways to describe these children which have no bearing to their disability whatsoever and are equally valid to who that person is. And I've got a really great article here which goes into this in some depth, so I'm going to read through it. I'll do the reading. I've read it a few times.
Do you want me to share real fast? Or do you want to read the article first?
Yeah, let me read first, because this has got some... There is some power in this article as well. So, to ensure inclusion, freedom and respect for all, it's time to embrace people-first language. This article is written by a lady called Kathy Snow, and she has a website called disabilityisnatural.org. She does lots of great essays, and her perspective is that she's a mother of a child who has a profound physical disability. And we'll find out a little bit more about him in this article. So, did you know, well, let me start with this quote here from Mark Twain, it's in the middle. The difference between the right word and almost the right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. Did you know that people with disabilities constitute our nation's largest minority group? 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. It's also the most inclusive group and most diverse. All ages, genders, religions, ethnicities, sexual orientations and socio-economic levels are represented. Contrary to conventional wisdom, individuals with disabilities are not people who suffer from the tragedy of birth defects, paraplegic heroes who struggle to become normal again, victims who fight to overcome their challenges. Nor are they retarded, autistic, blind, deaf, learning disabled, etc., etc., ad nauseum. They are people. They are mums and dads, sons and daughters, employees and employers, friends and neighbours, students and teachers, scientists, reporters, doctors, actors, presidents, and more. People with disabilities are people first. They do not represent a stereotypical perception, a homogeneous subspecies called the handicapped or the disabled. Each person is a unique individual. The only thing they may have in common with one another is being on the receiving end of societal ignorance, prejudice and discrimination. Furthermore, this largest minority group is the only one that any person can join at any time, at birth or later, through an accident, illness or the aging process. When it happens to you, will you have more in common with others who have a disability diagnosis, or with family, friends and co-workers? How will you want to be described, and how will you want to be treated? What is a disability? Is there a universally accepted definition of disability? No. First and foremost, a disability, we can find 3 from the federal government at least, and there's more than that definitions of disability. And that's just here in the US, let alone everywhere else. So no, first and foremost, a disability descriptor is simply a medical diagnosis, which may become a socio-political passport to services or legal status. Beyond that, the definition is up for grabs, depending on which service system is accessed. The disability criteria for early intervention is different from early childhood, which is different from special education, which is different from vocational rehabilitation, which is different from workers' compensation. That's a lot of shuns. Which is different from the military and so on. Thus, disability is a governmental socio-political construct created to identify those entitled to specific services or legal protections. The power of language and labels. Words are powerful, old, inaccurate descriptors, and the inappropriate use of medical diagnosis perpetuate negative stereotypes and reinforce a significant and incredibly powerful attitudinal barrier. And this invisible but potent force, not the diagnosis itself, is the greatest obstacle facing individuals who have conditions we call disabilities. When we see the diagnosis as the most important characteristic of a person, we devalue her as an individual. Do you want to be known for your psoriasis, arthritis, diabetes, sexual dysfunction, or any other condition? Disability diagnoses are unfortunately often used to define a person's value and potential, and low expectations and a dismal future are the predicted norm. Too often we make decisions about how or where the person will be educated, whether he'll work or not, where or how he'll live, and what services are offered, based on the person's medical diagnosis, instead of on the person's unique individual strengths and needs. With the best of intentions, we work on people's bodies and brains while paying scant attention to their hearts and minds. Far too often the help provided can actually cause harm and can ruin people's lives. The special services usually result in lifelong segregation. In special ed classrooms, residential facilities, day programs, sheltered work environments, segregated recreational activities and more. Are other people isolated, segregated and devalued because of their medical conditions? No. Inaccurate descriptors. Handicapped is an archaic term, no longer used in federal legislation, but that evokes negative images of pity, fear, and worse. The origin of the word is from an Old English bartering game in which the loser was left with his hand in his cap and was said to be at a disadvantage. It was later applied to other people who were thought to be disadvantaged. A legendary origin of the word refers to a person with a disability begging with his cap in his hand. Regardless of origin, this antiquated term perpetuates the negative perception that people with disabilities are a homogeneous group of pitiful, needy people. But others who share certain characteristics are not all alike, and individuals who happen to have disabilities are not all alike. In fact, people with disabilities are more like people without disabilities than different. Handicapped is often used to describe modified parking spaces, hotel rooms, restrooms, etc. But these usually provide access for people with physical mobility needs. They may provide no benefit for people with visual, hearing, or other conditions. This is one example of the misuse of the H word as a generic descriptor. The accurate term for modified parking spaces, hotel rooms, etc. is accessible. Disabled is also not appropriate. Traffic reporters often say disabled vehicle. They once said stalled car. Sports reporters say an athlete is on the disabled list. They once said injured reserve. Now I have a friend called Josh, and he was a counsellor here at camp in 2001, and he has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. After he finished camp, he went down to Denver to try and find a job, and he had a really hard time because of his disability. And he decided there was only one course of action left for him, and that was to become a stand-up comedian. So he did that. He entered Last Comic Standing in 2006, and he won it. Yeah, right. He's a very funny guy.
Yeah.
And one of his jokes when he's doing his stand-up is because he's also on the American Paralympic soccer team, and he was saying, well, we were out there in Brazil playing soccer, and I got injured, and the coach put me on the disabled list, and I was like, Coach, I thought that was the point. So yeah, they once said injured reserve. Others uses of the word today mean broken, non-functioning. People with disabilities are not broken. And that is how we see people equating people with disabilities as being broken. They're using that word to describe other things which are broken, which is not really cool. If a new toaster doesn't work, we say it's defective or damaged and either return it or throw it away. Shall we do the same with babies with birth defects or adults with brain damage? The accurate and respectful descriptors are congenital disability and brain injury. Many parents say, my child has special needs. This term generates pity, as demonstrated by the usual response. Oh, I'm so sorry, accompanied by a sad look or a sympathetic pat on the arm. Gag. The person's needs aren't special to him, they're ordinary. Many adults have said they detested this descriptor as children. Let's learn from them and stop using this pity-laden term. Suffers from, afflicted with, victim of, low, high functioning are similar descriptors are inaccurate, inappropriate, and archaic. A person simply has a disability or a medical diagnosis. Disability is not the problem. We seem to spend more time talking about the problems of a person with a disability than anything else. People without disabilities, however, don't constantly talk about their problems. This will result in an inaccurate perception. I know a few people who constantly talk about their problems, but for most of us, we don't. And would be counterproductive to creating a positive image. A person who wears glasses, for example, doesn't say, I have a problem seeing. She says, I wear or need glasses. What is routinely called a problem actually reflects a need. Thus, Susan doesn't have a problem walking, she needs or uses a wheelchair. Ryan doesn't have behaviour problems, he needs behaviour supports. Do you want to be known by your problems or by the many positive characteristics that make you the unique individual you are? When will people without disabilities begin speaking about people with disabilities in the respectful way they speak about themselves? Then there's the use of wrong, as in, we knew there was something wrong because what must it feel like when a child hears his parents repeat this over and over and over again? How would you feel if those who are supposed to love and support you constantly talk about what's wrong with you? Isn't it time to stop using words that cause harm? If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. George Orwell. The real problems are attitudinal and environmental barriers. The real problem is never a person's disability, but the attitudes of others. A change in our attitudes leads to changes in our actions. Attitudes drive actions. If educators believed in the potential of all children, and if they recognise that boys and girls with disabilities need a quality education so they can become successful in the adult world of work, Millions of children would no longer be segregated and undereducated in special ed classrooms. If employers believe adults with disabilities have or could learn valuable job skills, we wouldn't have an estimated and shameful 75% unemployment rate of people with disabilities. If merchants saw people with disabilities as customers with money to spend, we wouldn't have so many inaccessible stores, theatres, restaurants and more. If the service system identified people with disabilities as people we serve instead of clients, consumers, recipients, perhaps those employed in the field would realise they are dependent on people with disabilities for their livelihoods, and would therefore treat people with disabilities with greater respect and deference. If individuals with disabilities and family members saw themselves as first-class citizens who can and should be fully included in all areas of society, we might focus on what's really important: living a real life in the real world, enjoying ordinary relationships and experiences and dreaming big dreams. Like people without disabilities, instead of living in special segregated life in disability world, where services, low expectations, poverty, dependence and hopelessness are the norm. A new paradigm. Disability is a natural part of the human experience that is taken from the US Developmental Disabilities Bill of Rights Act. Like gender, ethnicity and other traits, a disability is simply one of many natural characteristics of being human. Are you defined by your gender, ethnicity, religion, age, sexual orientation, or other traits? No. So how can we define others by a characteristic that is known as a disability? Yes, disability is natural and it can be redefined as a body part that works differently. A person with spina bifida may have legs that work differently. A person with Down syndrome may learn differently, and so forth. And the body parts of people without disabilities are also different. It's the way these differences impact a person that creates the eligibility for services, entitlements, or legal protections. In addition, a disability is often a consequence of the environment. For example, many children with attention deficit disorder, ADD, and other similar conditions are not diagnosed until they enter the public school. Why then? Perhaps when they were younger, their learning styles were supported by parents and preschool teachers. But once they're in public school, if the child's learning style doesn't match an educator's teaching style, the child is said to have a disability and is shipped off to the special ed department. Why do we blame the child, label him as segregated in the special classroom? Shouldn't we, per special ed law, modify the regular curriculum and or provide support so that he can learn in ways that are best for him? It seems that ADD and other conditions may be environmentally induced disabilities. Who should be responsible for the teaching, the teacher or the child? It should be the teacher, man. If they need to come up with a different tactic, that they're the professional getting paid, they should be the ones who come up with that different tactic. When a person is in a welcoming, accessible environment with appropriate supports, accommodations and tools, where she can be successful, does she still have a disability? No, disability is not a constant state. The diagnosis may be constant, but whether it's a disability is more a consequence of the environment than what a person's body or brain can or cannot do. We don't need to change people with disabilities through therapies and interventions. We need to change the environment by providing assistive technology, devices, supports and accommodations to ensure a person's success. Using people-first language is crucial. People-first language puts the person before the disability and describes what a person has, not who a person is. Are you myopic or do you wear glasses? Are you cancerous or do you have cancer? Is a person handicapped, disabled, or does he have a disability? If people with disabilities are to be included in all aspects of society, and if they're to be respected and valued as our fellow citizens, we must stop using language that marginalizes and sets them apart. History tells us that the first way to devalue a person is through language. The use of disability descriptors is appropriate only in service systems at IFSP, IEP, and ISP meetings, all of which are lots of fun, and or in medical or legal settings. Medical diagnoses have no place, and they should be irrelevant within families, among friends, and in the community. Many people share a person's diagnosis in an attempt to provide helpful information, as when a parent says, "My child has Down syndrome," hoping others will understand what the child needs. But this can lead to disastrous outcomes. The diagnosis can scare people, generate pity, and or set up exclusion. Oh, we can't handle people like that. Thus, in certain circumstances and when it's appropriate, we can simply share information about what the person needs in a respectful, dignified manner, and omit the diagnosis. Besides, the diagnosis is nobody's business. Have individuals with disabilities given us permission to share their personal information with others? If not, how dare we violate their trust? Do you routinely tell every Tom, Dick and Harry about the boil on your spouse's behind? I certainly hope not. And we often talk about people with disabilities in front of them as if they're not there. Let's stop this demeaning practice. My son Benjamin is 25 years old. His interests, strengths and dreams are more important than his diagnosis. He loves politics, American history, classic rock and movies. He earned 2 karate belts, performed in plays, and won a national award for his Thumbs Down to Pity film. Benj has earned his associate's degree and is now working towards his bachelor's. He is blonde, has blonde hair, blue eyes, and cerebral palsy. His diagnosis is just one of many characteristics of the whole persona. He is not his disability, and his potential cannot be predicted by his diagnosis. When I meet new people, I don't whine that I'll never be a prima ballerina. I focus on what I can do, not what I can't. Don't you do the same? So when speaking about my son, I don't say, Benj can't write with a pencil. I say, Benj writes on a computer. I don't say he can't walk, I say he uses a power chair. It's a simple but vitally important matter of perspective. If I want others to know what a great young man he is, more importantly, if I want him to know what a great young man he is, I must use positive and accurate descriptors that portray him as a wonderful, valuable and respected person. The words used about a person have a powerful impact on the person. For generations, the hearts and minds of people with disabilities have been crushed by negative stereotypical descriptors that in turn led to segregation, abuse, devaluation, forced sterilization, and worse. We must stop believing and perpetuating the myths, the lies of labels. Children and adults who have conditions called disabilities are unique individuals with unlimited potential like anybody else. The civil rights and women's movements prompted changes in language, attitudes, and actions. The disability rights movement is following in those important footsteps. People First language was created by individuals who said, we are not our disabilities. We are first, we are people first. It's not political correctness, but good manners and respect. We can create a new paradigm of disability. In the process, we'll change ourselves and the world, and also generate positive change in the lives of people with disabilities. It's time to care about how our words impact the people we're talking about, and to be mindful of the attitudes and actions generated by the words we use. Isn't it time to make this change? If not now, when? If not you, who? Using people first language is the right thing to do, so let's do it.
Snaps.
That article makes my head want to explode every time because there's so much stuff in it, and it's just like, whoa, that's one thing, that's another thing.
Well, we even start with it, yeah.
Yeah, it's like so much is in there. And with that, and then I just go on to the special education part, and then I'm thinking about the disability, but I'm just like, oh my goodness. But with that, like growing up, my mom never used person first language. She still doesn't use it, honestly. And I have to like remind her of like why, because she doesn't mean it in a negative way. That's never her intention or anything like that. She just never heard about using it before. And when I first heard of it, I was like, really? Like, is it really gonna make a difference? You know, is it? But once you start forming like the sentences and stuff, your whole like concept of what you're saying becomes more positive. Like even though you're just switching around a couple of words, it's changing your mind frame on how to look at different things, and the fact that you are focusing more on the positive and what somebody can do rather than the negative and what they can't do. And it sounds obvious, but it's honestly like a huge switch to make, and it takes a long time to like do it naturally, I guess, because sometimes you'll find yourself slip up at first and you're like, oh, did I say that in the right way? You know, but then even outside of the phrasing, it just helps you approach situations in a more positive way and think about the positive ways you can adapt things rather than say like, oh, well, this isn't gonna work. You know, so it's just changing your whole mindset rather than being politically correct. And it changes you as well as changing how the other person views the situation as well. And I'm realized that more over the years how much it does change it. When at first I just thought it was like flipping a couple of words, you know. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions? All good. How should I act? How should I act around people with disabilities? That's often a big stumbling block for people. People get awkward and they act funny around people and creates this sense of awkwardness. Right, Teri?
My life is pretty awkward. Just general. Take it.
We got a little multi-choice quiz coming up here, so I'll just read out the questions and just shout out the answer, and then we'll have just a little discussion about each one. First and foremost, people with disabilities deserve to be treated A, as if they're fragile, B, with dignity and respect, C, with special attention to let them know that you care. B, yeah, just like we would all expect to be treated with dignity and respect. It's true to say that some people are fragile with disabilities. Also true to say that some people are not. Teri, are you fragile?
I'm not fragile.
I like to give myself a healthy distance between me and Teri when I ask that question.
Yeah.
Just in case she wants to prove it. If you're working with children, obviously you want to give them all special attention to let them know that you care. That should be just a given rule for working with children and anyone that you're providing care for, really. If you're unsure of what to say when you first meet someone with a disability, should you try A, hello, B, I'm not really sure about this, or C, how long have you been disabled? Always a great way to start a...
That's great.
Speaking of a mortified look. So yeah, hello, it's always a great way to start any kind of conversation. But
the funny thing is, you'd be surprised at how much I get the other two. Like, that, I don't know if they literally say, I don't know if I'm sure about this, I'm pretty sure I've had it happen before, but they have this like terrified look on their face and they're like, you know, kind of like that actually. And then, how long have you been disabled or in a wheelchair? I get that as the first thing somebody asks me all the time. I think it's just because people feel like anxious and awkward, and like when you're in that mode, you say the first thing that's in your head, and sometimes you wish you could just take it back, like right after you say it, but it's already out there. And personally, for me, we'll go into this more, but for me, I'd rather somebody ask the question than ignore my existence. Or if like, you know, I just want to be the person to answer that question, and I'm open to it. So, but I would always like to hear hello before it. You know, that'd be nice.
when meeting a person with limited hand use or artificial limbs, should you A, simply touch hands or a person's prosthesis to acknowledge his or their presence, shake the left hand, or C, either is fine depending on the situation? Yeah. How would you know?
Follow their lead.
Yeah, let them do whatever they're comfortable with.
Yeah, in that instance, like a lot of times my right arm is my weaker arm, so I don't like to use it, though I probably should. If we're talking PT and stuff like that, I probably should. But I usually put out my left arm first, and it kind of catches people off guard, but then they catch on. You know, it's a little awkward, but it's like, hey. So.
For activities you're doing, it might take a person with a disability. A, forever, don't worry about waiting. B, extra time, so be sensitive when planning. Or C, no more time than anybody else.
B or C.
It's exactly the right answer. It could be B or C. There are certainly times when you're planning an activity where you might want to give someone a little extra time to do that activity, or you might want to make some other kind of change to the activity so it's accessible to that person. There's also times when you're working with people with disabilities where they don't take any extra time to do anything. We know some children with autism who might flash a maths paper way quicker than some other kids their age, because that's just the way their brain's wired. Maths is easy for them, or it isn't for most people. And we'll talk a little bit more about accommodations here in a little while.
And I think that's also going in in and having the open conversation with that kid about what they think they're capable of, and just and feeling it out, you know, seeing how long it would take for them to do those certain things and adjust it to that.
And I think as well, when you're working with children, also getting a parent's perspective is good. You know, for us, we often work with adults, and our adults are really very capable of telling us what they need. But a parent's perspective also helps as well, because they've often been the primary caregiver, so they have a slightly different perspective. So if a person with a disability has a companion or a sign language interpreter, should you A, speak directly to the person with a disability, B, speak as loudly as you can, or C, speak directly to the companion or interpreter? Yeah, you're having a conversation with somebody, have a conversation with that person. It can get difficult if you're working with someone who's profoundly deaf and they have like a sign language interpreter. Well, it's really distracting because their hands are doing this and you want to look over there, and then they start talking at you over here and you're talking to that person here. It's really tempting to go right there. But stay with the person you're having a conversation with. If you need to change anything, that's this person's job to let you know. That's part of their job. You're not expected to know. They're there to help with that.
Yeah, and in other instances, like if I go out with a friend or something, I've had multiple times where I will go out to eat and the waiter or waitress will ask my friend what I want to eat. And I'm like, they don't know yet because I haven't told them. Like, you need to ask me what I want to eat.
Revolutionary concept, I know.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, and there's different situations, and I'll just have people like approach my friends and say like the weirdest things, like, oh, you have a place in heaven for hanging out with her or something like that, and it's like, what?
I've had that said to me.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, God doesn't know me very well.
And it's just awkward, you know. It's like, why are you talking to my friends like that? Like, we're just hanging out just like any of your friends. Or I'll have people like congratulate me for going out. Like, they're like, so proud of you for coming out. Proud of you too.
Good job, it's Friday.
We all got out there.
It's really great. You should buy us both a drink. Like, that'd be great. So like, it's just really weird interactions, and a lot of times they'll just go to my friends first, and my friends are like, why don't you just talk to her? She's right there. So yeah.
If you are talking to someone who's profoundly deaf, who can't hear anything, it doesn't matter how loudly you talk, they will not hear you. They will know that you're shouting at them. That'll be it. Okay. When talking to a person in a wheelchair for more than a few minutes, should you lean on the wheelchair to let the person know you're paying attention? Bend over, put your hands on your knees, or try to sit down so that you'll be at eye level with that person? See, yeah, that's always a great way to have a conversation. Face to face.
I really do not like it when people I don't know lean on my chair. Like, I'm not a piece of furniture for you to rest on. And so, a lot of times I'll just drive forward and let them fall over because they're being stupid, leaning on me. And then, like, like, if you see me out with some of my friends, they might be leaning against my chair or something, but that's more of in a, like, leaning on your friend's arm sort of way, in like a, what do you call it, like an affectionate sort of way, rather than, oh, I'm tired, I'm just gonna rest, you know, so there's a difference between that.
Yeah, and it's all about, you know, having your personal bubble. Your bubble is smaller for your friends than it is for complete strangers, and that's just
Yeah,
a
and if
normal part
you
of
come
being human.
in my bubble, I might pop you instead of you popping my bubble.
It's called the palsy punch, right?
Yeah.
You can find out more about that in Josh's show as well. He talks about that at some level. From sort of the other side of things, just don't do this all the time, because if you do, your chiropractor will be your best friend by the time you're 28, 9, whatever.
Yeah.
And also, again, leaning on the chair, people do it all the time. Just see what this looks like right now. First of all, it's just uncomfortable, right? I'm right there. My armpit is right in Teri's face, and that's just not a cool place to stick your armpit.
You can like see the power dynamics. too.
Yeah.
Of him like physically being over you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing, like if you're out and you have no chairs to get on the same level, it's looking down and like talking to me is a lot better because I can actually hear what's going on instead of me tugging on everybody's clothes like, what happened? What happened then? Like I'm just going back and forth trying to get the story again because I can't hear anything that's happening up here. So just be mindful of where you're talking.
And in passing, and I actually like this more really for working with kids than necessarily working with people who use wheelchairs, but just popping down onto your knee and just talking to somebody face to face. Have you ever done that with children? Yeah. Often they are completely surprised when it happens because they're just not used to adults doing that. They're used to adults doing this. If a person has difficulty speaking, should you A, give that person unhurried attention, B, don't pretend to understand when you don't, ask the person to repeat what they said, or C, both A and B. Yeah, give them the time to say what it is they want to say and take the time to understand what they want you to understand. Working here at camp, like I mentioned, we have one of our campers who's come to camp every year since he started in 1951, that's Dan, and he is very, very difficult to understand. For people who are younger than him, we see people who are sort of in their 30s and 40s, if they had the same kind of needs that Dan had, now they would be learning to use augmented communication devices like the boxes where you program sentences in and then hit a button and that says it for you. But in the when Dan was growing up in the 1940s and 50s, that technology obviously wasn't available. So he muddled through, and I've known Dan for 15 years, and it still takes me a really long time to get through a conversation with him. But we'll take the time that we need, and it will involve him explaining things over and over again, saying the words over and over again, maybe breaking the sentences down to words, the words down to letters, until we get where we need to be so that he can be understood. It takes patience on both sides. But what Dan has no patience for is people pretending to understand him. It's really easy to do that. You can look for the visual cues, like if he's nodding his head, you could nod your head too and pretend you understand what he's saying, or if he chuckles, you can chuckle too and have a good laugh at some joke that you don't understand or even know what the words are for. Dan will know that in about 25 seconds that you're just pretending to listen. There's nobody he has a conversation with who doesn't ask him to repeat it if they're trying to find out what it is he's saying. He knows that, he's used to that. So if people pretend to understand what he's saying, he will tell them to go and play an I-70, then he'll laugh, and then he won't ever talk to that person ever again. He's got a little bit more grumpy as he got older.
Another thing I do with that is I also repeat what I think they said, so they know that I'm listening and that I'm trying to concentrate on what they're saying, and they could correct me if I got it wrong.
That really helps you stay in the context of the conversation.
Yeah.
If somebody having a hard time understanding somebody and you just let them go on and on, you'll get to a point where you have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. At the start, you probably have an idea of what the context of that conversation is. And if you can stay in that by asking those questions, you can keep in the context, and that allows you to understand a little bit more easily the words which you think you're hearing.
Yeah.
You know that relate to the conversation, the context of the conversation, so that helps you stay on track. And then if you're working with people who use devices to make sentences, that can take a really long time. I've known a couple of people who could program in sentences into those devices in seconds, and they can stay right in a conversation. It's an amazing thing to watch, but that's the exception rather than the norm. Mm-hmm. We'll see some of our campers with profound physical disabilities, like Michaela in the story. She uses a switch by her head, and to make sentences, she's got things which are scrolling across this computer screen. She's picking out menus and sub-menus, and then eventually she gets to a word and she's creating sentences. It can take a really long time. So particularly if you're having a conversation, say between three people, and one of those people uses a talker and the other two don't, you've got to be really aware of where the conversations will be. Because you might be talking about something, and they start programming something into their talker because they want to make a comment about that part of the conversation. In the meantime, these two have been nattering on, they've gotten to this part of the conversation, so they need to be able to step back to this part of the conversation to allow that person to share what it is that they wanted to share. When you greet a person who has a visual disability, should you A, grab their hand and shake it, B, tell the person your name and where you are, or C, pat them on the back? B, verbally announce yourself first. If someone is profoundly blind and you just grab their hand, who knows what they might think is happening, and who knows how they might react. Patting them on the back. Well, I mean, if you're buddies with someone and there's back slapping, whatever, that's again, it's like a personal space kind of thing. But if you're coming up to somebody you've never met before and you're on the back, it's kind of condescending. And what could be worse than that?
I would probably hit somebody if I didn't know they were back there and then, hey!
But what's worse than patting on the back?
Oh, patting on my head.
Right?
I hate that.
Yeah.
That's like my biggest pet peeve. I'm like, why? Why are you patting me on the head? I'm not an animal. You don't need to pat me on the head.
Absolutely. If you need to pat someone on the head, Houston's over here.
Yeah, exactly. But people do it all the time. And I'm like, that's so weird. Do you want me to pat you on your head?
Come kneel down over here. Okay, when you offer walking assistance to someone who has a visual disability, should you A, let the person take your arm and then tell them when you're approaching inclines or turning right or left? B, lead them by the sound of your voice? Or C, lead them by the hand? A is actually a really nice way of doing it. I kind of disagree with this question. I think you should ask the person first, see if they would like your assistance, and then listen to how you can provide assistance to that person. A is certainly a really common way of doing it, but it's not the only way. And if the person who's doing the leading doesn't have great spatial awareness, then it could be difficult for the person being led. I'm leading someone on my elbow here, and I'm completely oblivious to this table that's right here. And I'm just dragging them, along the table, which is not great for them. So, folks who might need assistance may have more or less trust in people to do that correctly.
Yeah, and I have a friend who likes to be led by just holding her hand and that sort of thing. I mean, for me, she just walks behind my chair, so I run into whatever before she not good for her. But again, like some people might not even need the help going wherever they need to go, so just be mindful of that.
Another way that people might like is to put their hand on your shoulder and just walk right behind you. But yeah, there may be people who just don't need your help at all. They're great, they're fine. When should you ask a person about the origin or details of his or her disability? A, right away so you can figure out how best to serve them. B, wait until you become real friends or they offer to tell you. C, never. Avoid the topic indefinitely.
B.
Yeah, it could be B. It could be A too. Yeah, it just kind of depends on what your situation is and what the role is in that relationship. So, to give an example of that, here at camp, we have a 16-page application form. It asks a lot about the campus who are going to be coming here. Our counsellors are going to be with them for 5 days. They don't want to spend those 5 days looking at the basics. They need to spend those 5 days getting into the more advanced stuff so they can help them have a really great time at camp. What the information we'll have from the application form will help them be in that position to provide a really good experience from at camp right from the get-go, not spending the first few days just learning that stuff.
But for me personally, I'd rather people ask the questions if that's keeping you from getting to a deeper relationship or whatever, or just interacting with me, period. Because a lot of times I know people have tons of questions like little kids, and I would rather you get those out so we can move on to the actual real interactions. So for me, it's answering questions that's more important. I'm not saying everybody will feel the same way. You might get an adverse effect from some people about asking that question, but for me personally, I would just like to go there and get it over with, and just open people's minds to everything they don't understand. So even during this interaction, if you guys have any questions, I am open to anything. And I promise you, I've been asked everything. So you can't come up with anything new.
It's prizes if you do that.
Yeah.
Can I ask something? Is it appropriate to ask someone if you can ask them hey, may I ask you about what's going on here? Give them the option to say no without actually asking the question.
I don't think it would hurt. I think it's better to try to interact than avoid the whole situation. So if you're asking if you can ask, I get that a lot. They'll be like, can I ask you a question? And I'm like, bet you I know what it is. You know? Like, so yeah, I would ask first if you wanted to see what that reaction would be. But, you know, just ask.
Yeah, as we saw earlier, unanswered questions can create real barriers between people. So it's not to say that everybody will be open to that, but I think, you know, I mean, forgive me for saying this, but Teri, you represent really a new breed of person. You know, 20 years ago we didn't see young ladies with physical disabilities living independent lives who would do this kind of thing. So definitely a new paradigm here.
Yeah, and even growing up, like even in college, like I would have people say, well, we never asked you to go do this because we didn't know how you'd be able to get there. Well, ask me! Like, I would figure it out. Like, we could actually come up with a plan. So it's like people are afraid to ask the question, so they just avoid you and you get left out. It's like, no, if you asked me, like, if I wanted to, then we could figure out how to overcome that obstacle, whatever it may be. So